So one could say then that these three men and their lives and the overlap of their lives tell us something about the moment of zero. We can say zero because, of course, that's the beginning of this story. And the most important part of it is the coming together of the Christians in Rome, or the Christians and Rome. And so the idea that this story of Jesus of Nazareth, who will transform Western civilization, that would fall right into the middle of Rome at her peak, the peak of the new Augustan state. That has always amazed people all through history. The idea that this extraordinary transformation of Rome would also be the moment of the transformation of the religion, of the Judeo-Christian society, and that Jesus would be able to lead such a transformation. Now, the most important thing, of course, about Jesus for our purpose is his preaching. What did he say? What did he do? What did he tell people? And the most important thing to come out of his life, that is his life and his work, is a whole new conception of God. We talked about this in week 9, and we've talked about it in week 10. But here you're looking at Rembrandt's wonderful etching, which is called Jesus Preaching, but it's well known as the 100 guilder print. It's one of the most successful prints in the whole history of Western art. Rembrandt, as you know, was the most successful printer of probably any artist who ever lived. He made more money from his prints than I would imagine anybody else. He learned early in his career that he could make a print, that is an etching or an engraving, from one of his paintings, and that he could sell many prints and make a lot of money, whereas one painting, one oil, might take him a whole year, and it would get a good price, but that it still wasn't equal to. So he is really the first person to understand what printing could do as a moneymaker. And this is his most successful print of all time. This is Jesus preaching, and you can see the wonderful vision of the poor people around him, and down there in front are the sick people, and they're all listening, and then there's wonderful light that emanates out of his head. And so this is the great Rembrandt vision of Jesus as the preacher. And what was he preaching, and what was his life all about? It was all about a new idea of God. Now, in the ancient world, there was polytheism, there was monotheism, that is represented by the Jews and by Judaism. And then now, with his life and his leadership, there would be a third idea about God, and that was a whole new conception of God as both distant, all-powerful, omnipotent God, and the person of Jesus who comes down into this world and is concerned about you and loves you and is personal, immediate, caring, and, of course, also then the Holy Spirit. So there would be three ways that God could enter into this world. So it was a whole new idea about God. And if we just think for a minute about both the first chapter of Genesis and the opening chapter of the Gospel according to John, it's a very good illustration of how these Jews, who knew their Hebrew Bible well, how these Jews in this period of 40 A.D., how they thought about both the story in the Hebrew Bible and the story they were watching in front of their eyes. And so if you put Genesis, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, that is Moses' God, that is the great God of the Jews. And then if you put it right next to the Gospel according to John, the opening words, in the beginning was the Word, that word in English means logos in Greek, because all the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are in Greek, and it means order. And so John is saying, in the beginning, like in Genesis, like in the opening sentences of Genesis, so in the opening sentence of my book, In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was order, and in the beginning order was with God. And the second verse, and he was with God. In other words, he switches from the word logos to the personal pronoun he, meaning word, order, logos is Jesus. So if you take the first chapter of Genesis and the first chapter of John, you have the way these Christians were thinking, that Jesus had always been there in the creation. And now he had come down to this earth. Now he had come down to be with us. Christianity is giving to Western culture a God who is both distant and is present in the person of Jesus. And the other thing is that time itself, the very working of time, the working of God in time, was a transformation of the idea of time. And now it's transformed into doing things, changing things, completing things, and bringing God's plan into reality, as Paul called it, in the fullness of time. It's a great phrase he invented. And in the fullness of time, there is now then a whole new conception of God, a complete change of values. So the values that this group will give to the Mediterranean world is such that vengeance is bad and forgiveness is good. All you have to do is take those two in order to try to think of your reaction in the first century, whether you're Greek or Roman or North African or Lebanese or wherever you are. If you're looking at what these people are telling you or the preaching that you're hearing, there's one of the biggest changes right there. Vengeance is bad, forgiveness is good. And the reason it's such a great example is go back to the Iliad. What is the Iliad about? Vengeance. Exactly. That's what it's all about. I mean, all those conversations and all those people, Achilles and Agamemnon and Clytemnestra at home, oh my God, is she waiting with her vengeance? She's got a big surprise for Agamemnon, right? All those people and all those stories, it all comes back to vengeance. That's a good thing. You're supposed to right the order of good and bad by going after the bad people and slay them and wipe them off the face of this earth. And now these new people come along and say, no. Vengeance is bad. You shouldn't be using all your energy to try to revenge yourself. You should forgive your enemies. Oh my God, forgive your enemies. Can you imagine anything so crazy and stupid as that? Forgive your enemies, huh? Imagine these people listening to that. So that's the second thing. Third thing, whole new idea of community. And number 4, a new conception of what is actually the good life. Now, if you think of Cicero and his book, he wrote a whole book on the good life, so you can just go and read his book. And for Cicero, the good life is the life of duties. You do your duty. That's the good life. And this is so much more than that. This isn't, you don't just do your duty. You're a citizen, so you go and you serve on the jury. That's your duty. So that was part of it. That was part of a Roman duty. But here was something completely different. Way more than that. Where you would be going out into the community and offering help to people, devoting yourself to the sick and the needy, etc., etc., etc. Long list. And most important of all, new emphasis on the individual. And let us just stop at number 5 right now, because you are going to see in part 2 tonight the best example of new individualism in Western literature of the whole class so far. And that's the book that we're going to talk about in part 2. That book is Augustine's Confessions. And Augustine's Confessions are a book in which a person, a Western individual person, spills out everything in a book. Tells you everything about his life, like nobody ever had before. Things nobody has ever told before in a book. Literally nobody. And he invents a whole new literary form, confession, a new kind of book, autobiography we call it now. But for him it was a confession, and it will reign all the way through to our present day. You people have read lots and lots of confessions. I'll bet somebody here has got a book they absolutely love, and it's somebody's book that is a confession of some kind. After Augustine, the most famous confession is Rousseau. So you wait to 1750 to get another person who writes a book called Confessions, knowing he's writing his book with the same title as Augustine, and knowing what Augustine did with his book. Rousseau in 1750 writes his Confession, which of course is all about sex. See, Augustine had a lot of other sins, but Rousseau only had one kind of sin, and that was sex. Sex, 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 sex. So if you want to run right out and get it, you can have a good read. And then there are all kinds of books and ever after Rousseau, through the 18th century, the 19th century, and the 20th century, of people confessing. Henry Miller. You know, Henry Miller. How many have read Henry Miller's Confessions here? Nobody? Nobody's going to admit it. Nobody's going to admit it. There isn't one person. Jack Kerouac. Think of the names of all the people you know where they produced a confession. What I did. Here I went, there I went, I did this, I did that. André Gide. So many great 19th century French writers gave a brilliant account of their secret good deeds and bad deeds, sins, good and bad. So, a whole new emphasis on the individual, and the literary form that will give voice to that is confession. So that's why Augustine's book tonight is so important, because this is the beginning, if you think about it, this is the beginning of Western literature. I mean, when you think of how important letters, that's Cicero, and autobiography are, they are distinctly Western forms of literature. They are distinctly Western. They're not Chinese, they're not Indian, they're not Islamic. They are distinctly European, and they are all the way through of our literature, and always thinking back to Augustine and this book. I mean, when Rousseau wrote his book, he knew exactly what he was talking about when he gave it the title Confessions. He knew that he was referring back to Augustine, and what he was doing was, of course, saying, you know, in my age, it's not God. I don't care about God, and I don't care about Adam and Eve, and I don't care about the garden or any of that. My confessions will be way better than that. I've got so much sin, you've never even thought of all this sin. So he's full of it. So that is number 5, new emphasis on the individual, confessions. And so, as I say here, to a world ruled by fate and the whims of hundreds of capricious gods, Christianity brought the promise of order and everlasting life. And I'm repeating that word order as that opening verse of the Gospel according to John, because that's what he means. And that's what these Greek writing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were thinking when they wrote their books. They were thinking of the logos, Logos, the order. That's what had happened, that there had been new order given to the universe.